Okay, great. So welcome to the general webinar for MC Australia 1819 selection. So if we get this up, all right. So today I just wanted to start by introducing myself. So my name is Jessie. I'm the current MCP of ISEC in Australia. I was the MCVP B2B last term in ISEC in Malaysia, and before that also MCVP PD in ISEC in Australia, and an LCP of 2014 originally from ISEC in Melbourne. And I really love to eat spicy food. So whoever does end up in the team will need to bring me some food to eat because that's the way we can ensure a successful transition. Okay, so the agenda for today is going to be as follows. We're going to cover the Australian cultural context, looking at the entity context as well in terms of history, data, and culture, the 2017 and 2018 national direction, seeing the purpose, the goals, the wildly important goals, and the behaviors of the previous year as well as the year to come. And finally, some time for Q&A. So some expectations of this space are, one is that it's not a comprehensive review. So we've already provided some resources which all of the prospective candidates can look through. That not all of the information I'll be mentioning is directly written on the slide. So please make sure you take notes for the things that you find interesting and you want to remember. Please write down your questions and also the corresponding section. So if you had a question about entity culture, put it down because we'll be answering all of the questions at the end. So before we start, are there any questions or expectations before we begin?
No, I'm good.
Okay, great. So let's, yep, from Eugenia, was there anything?
No, I said I'm good.
Okay, cool. So let's continue. So first thing to know about cultural context is this statement on the screen is something that's often said before we have events or before we actually start conferences or anything to do with running something official in Australia, which is the acknowledgement of country. And in this case, before we officially start this webinar, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, sea and community. And I pay respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and their elders, past, present and also future. So with this, it's important to know that Indigenous Australians are actually part of the world's oldest continuing cultures and civilizations. That from the culture that they bring, from the stories that they share, and the continuing importance that they actually play in Australian society is something to note. It's also important to know at the same time that the Indigenous Australians, relatively speaking, compared to other, say, Western societies, are treated roughly the same as they might be in the US and probably a little bit worse than they are in Canada and definitely in New Zealand, in that they are very socially, economically disadvantaged within the country and that they're disproportionately represented across areas of concern, such as in health and also education and also incarceration, being in prisons and so on. And this is a really complex topic and also a multi-generational one, which has been ongoing since the start of European settlement. It's an important context to know because these are the first people of our nations, and this is more or less the current condition within the country. So if we look at Australia geographically, you'll see that we're quite a large country and you can see comparisons between different regions of the world. Something interesting to note is that there's actually a similar accent across the country and continent. And when I did a bit of research into it, it's due to the fact that because we have a relatively short period of time of European settlement and because people are quite mobile, it's very easy for people to move between different areas of the country that we end up sounding more or less the same. And when research has been done into things like accents, it actually does show as well the increasing multicultural influence of the different communities that come to Australia at different points in history and actually settle in the country. So what I would like to actually demonstrate is some quick facts from our 2016 census. So every 5 years, we do a massive survey of the whole country, and this is a snapshot of what Australia looks like at the moment. So if Australia was only 100 people, as you can see, that's about 240,000 people per dot, the entire population of Australia. And the population divide is fairly even between female and male proportions. And politically, you'll see that the majority of those who represent us are actually male. And from a business standpoint, that even more of that goes towards the male ratio when we look at CEOs. And when we look into education, compared to previous times, more and more of the Australian population is being educated above year 12 level. That's our final year of high school. For all of your information, it's actually possible to leave school starting from year 10 onwards to study more vocational courses, and more people are actually finishing high school than they were compared to older generations, where you can see the changes happening here. So when it comes to religion, there's actually been a huge recent shift where the no religion group is now the largest religious group in Australia. And this generally reflects in terms of seeing that you'll see many different religious buildings across Australia, being namely churches and temples and mosques and synagogues. And at the same time, most of the population actually doesn't identify with a religion. And if we look back in time, that no religion was actually so small about 60, 70 years ago that it didn't make up a single dot. So there's been a huge shift in the demographic of religion. And for the 23.4 million people who do live in Australia, you can see that 2/3 actually live in capital cities. This is also reflected in where iSeek in Australia is present. We're in the major cities of Australia, and that only 1/3 of our population lives outside of the capitals. And 80% of migrants to Australia also settle in capitals. So in my home state of Victoria, and as well as where the MC currently lives, which is New South Wales, you can sometimes see advertisements that actually encourage people to live in more regional and rural parts of the states, because they're trying to encourage better distribution of the population. So generation gap, if we look at the age distribution, there's an even split between generation X and Y and baby boomers, and there's a smaller population of those born before 1945. If we look at those who own homes, a really topical issue for millennials, people from Gen Y onwards, is the fact that home ownership is getting increasingly more difficult, and baby boomers make up the majority of that ownership. When it comes to place of birth, more than 1 in 4 Australians are actually born overseas. And where they're born is largely in the UK, followed by China and India. Especially if you go to the major cities of Australia, you can see quite significant proportions of non-Anglo communities and migrant communities existing there. And going back more than 100 years, that our migrants came from only a set few destinations, which were the UK, the Ireland, and Germany. So we've definitely seen a huge shift there. So only 3% of our population actually identify as Indigenous, belonging to the cultures which I mentioned previously. And the Northern Territory, which is one of the northern areas of Australia, you can see that 1/3 are Indigenous. But in the prisons of the Northern Territory, going along with the incarceration state that I was talking about, Indigenous people are vastly overrepresented, more than the 1/3 that they make up in the whole population. And overall, Australia has definitely been changing as a nation. It's really fascinating to be part of this country, which was officially settled by Europeans in 1778, which before that, for tens of thousands of years, have actually been settled by Indigenous Australians, and seeing how much in recent decades that things have actually changed. And hopefully that can give you a bit of context as to why things are the way that they are in the country itself. So if we head back to the PPT, one way that I actually like to summarize how the culture of Australia is, when we talk about Australia being a multicultural country, is that on the screen I have a picture of people going for yum cha, which is for Chinese dim sum which is very typical in many parts of the country. And one thing that I noticed when I was taking a Colombian teammate of mine in my first MC team is actually that it's so common to see people of all sorts of backgrounds who look very, very differently, all going to have yum cha on a weekend and enjoying it equally. And this for me is very cool because it shows that Australia is a country that's willing to engage in different cultures and traditions. And I guess the other example that I'd like to give is anytime that I go to an AIESEC international conference, I kind of play this game with myself where I look at delegates from different entities, and then I would imagine if that I put an Australian accent on top of this delegate, would this be something that would look normal, or would this be something that I would expect? And the answer for any delegate across any part of the world, the happy answer is actually yes, which again goes to show how multicultural Australia is and the different backgrounds that people actually come from. So now we're going to move into the entity context. And just to give you a snapshot of the history, AIESEC in Australia was founded in 1964. So we've been around for almost 50 years now. In this whole time, we've only had 2 international MCPs. The biggest number of LCs that we've ever had is 22. We're currently sitting on half of that at 11. And also the highest amount of realizations that the entity has done is 536 back in 2015-16. So you can see here across the recent few terms, there's a picture of how much exchange we've done and also what are the products that we've done with a bit of a story behind them. So having been part of the entity since 12-13 myself, I can tell you that from 12-13 up until the start of 15-16, the main areas of growth were actually in process optimization for the different products. Because before that, when we were doing less exchange, it was a matter of being able to simply attract people to go on the exchanges. And the more that we started to handle volume, the more important it became to actually have good processes in place. So for a lot of my time throughout my LC journey in AIESEC, we were always looking at process optimization, both for outgoing and incoming exchange. We used to also not differentiate very much between outgoing and incoming. And in 12-13, actually the strategy at local level was only to sell for OGV, or back then OGCDP, because the OGT and OGE type of projects were more branded as being for internal membership. You can also see that in 12-13 and 13-14, there was still an amount of IGV that was happening. This generally decreased as we found it more and more unviable to actually run the product within the context, which was looking into the sustainability of the product, as well as finding impactful enough topics to actually run the product too. And you can also very clearly see that OGV has been our strongest product throughout. I would say that in the context of looking at the different attitudes and cultures of the terms, 12-13 was very much about implementation. It involved the MC coming into their term ready with product packages and ready with plans and systems to be executed. 13-14 shaped a lot of the growth around policies, so making sure that even the way that we're governing the entity was allowing us to achieve growth. That before, when EP contracts, for example, had a 12-month allowance for people to be on myiesec.net, that the change to only allowing for 6 months actually encourage our customers to go on exchange and to be able to actually, be more decisive when it came to taking their project. So you see that there was a dip in 14-15. From 13-14, 14-15, 15-16, Australia didn't experience a very successful expo migration. So the numbers for 14-15 are actually not entirely accurate. There was a bit of a dip though. And when it comes to the ICX products, in this year, you can see IGV decreased, and IGT, it was actually the highest amount of contracts that were signed in a while. In this term, about 100 contracts were actually signed, and the conversion for those contracts was quite low at about 30%. Still, in this time, it was the first time where the IGT commission and product really believed that they could do a lot of sales and actually get a lot of companies to believe in our products. And this was also the start of a shift for more collaboration, both in our national affiliation fee and the financial model, which actually goes behind it. 15-16 came in with a lot of resources and a lot of ambition. This was the biggest MC team that AIESEC in Australia has seen, with 10 people, and it also involved having one person per major product that we ran. So there were 3 operations people in this era. So you can see there was significant IGT growth in this time, as well as for OGT and OGE, and we continued the growth trend for OGV. 1617 saw a huge cultural shift. So from wanting to build capacity in the network and have a lot more decision making coming from the network. This happened at a time when the network wasn't quite ready to experience it. And so the decrease from 1516 to 1617 was actually a 41% drop. What 1670 did bring was good systems of internal communications that really allowed the LCPs of the network to be involved in decision making and understanding what was happening at a national level, which is what currently 1718 has been trying to continue. The key strategies for 1718 have been for focused growth. So you can see that when it comes to our key product, majority of our results are coming from OGV, which has been our focus for the past peak. We are pouring more resources into IGT. OGT and OGE have experienced a drop. And at the same time, for a term to date progress, we are growing roughly 28% from the previous term. And as you can see, we are just 12 realizations away from achieving the realizations of the 1617 term. Also important to note here is that IGV has ceased to be running as a product in ISEC in Australia, and IGE, due to visa complications, is also not running. So officially, we run 4 products right now in ISEC in Australia, and we actively support OGV and IGT from an MC level. So as I mentioned in the expectations, if you have questions, please do write them down so I can answer anything at the end. So going into some key supporting data, you can see here from the definitions of sustainability, where we have LC sustainability, entity, MC, as well as product sustainability. This actually gives you a snapshot of our 11 current entities and how they're doing. So I'm pleased to report, starting from the MC, that on both levels 1 and 2, we are sustainable, meaning that all of our expenses are greater than our incomes, and we also achieve more than 70% of our our expenses in income from either our affiliation fee or directly from exchange income. You can see that all LCs are also sustainable on a level 1 standpoint, and we do have 5 LCs who need to achieve more of their income through exchange, which means that our entity is still not achieving level 2 sustainability. So looking onto product sustainability, the way that you can understand this is that anything which is in gray or black means that that LC actually doesn't run the product, or they haven't given us their goals. And for the colors in red, these show you how sustainable those products are, either because the LCs are actually spending too much in the product, or because they're not earning enough and doing enough exchange to actually earn it back. If you're interested in understanding a more in-depth analysis of our financial state, you can join the finance webinar, which will happen in a few days' time. And to report on the key metric, or MOS for TM, which we were looking at, one thing that's important to know is that from the start of the 1718 term, no LCs were actually really measuring their percentages of members productive. So as you can see, closing off from the end of November, we managed to get all LCs except for 3 actually reporting on their data. It's important to know as well that some of these measurements were not accurately recorded, as LCs are still learning how to do it in the most accurate way. At the same time, for the ways that it was being recorded, we do have an average fulfillment of 52.23-ish%. And for the standout entities, especially for RMIT and QUT, these were also 2 of the LCs that had the highest percentage of goal achievement for the past peak. So for at least the highest performing LCs, you can still see a correlation between their percentage of members productive as well as for their goals achievement. Now I'm going to go more into how the entity culture is shaped, firstly starting from external considerations. So number 1 is that all of ISEC in Australia is university-based LCs, and typically the membership do come from those universities. At the same time, it isn't unheard of for a person who's studying at another university to join an LC in which they're not a student, and also even to become the LCP of that LC. Where we've seen this in the past is when people from universities that have larger LCs of ISEC then become the LCP of smaller, more startup-based LCs. So we generally follow a semester-based timeline with breaks of 1 month in July, and our largest break is from December till February. This means that the global fruit peak is actually our smaller peak, where we only receive 20 to 30% of our results, and December and February is where 70 to 80% of the exchange comes in. We're present currently in 4 states in Australia, being Western Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland. Victoria and New South Wales are home to the cities of Melbourne and Sydney, which hold the largest populations of Australia as well. And there's 3 types of universities in Australia, being research universities, technology universities, which are more practical based, and also innovation universities, of which we have one LC, which is Isaac and Macquarie. And because of our external situation, visas and costs make it most conducive for global talent to become the sole ICS product. So, like I mentioned before, while we've dabbled previously in IGE and IGV, the only ICS product we run right now is GT. So the structure of the National Plenary is that we have a national leadership team, which is made up of the MC plus the LCPs, and that our decision making and governance as an NLT are supported by subcommittees. The subcommittees here are chaired by LCPs, and they comprise of LCPs and LCVPs as members. And we have an exchange standards subcommittee, national meetings, membership, finance, and legislation. Exchange standards was a subcommittee which was introduced before ECBs became compulsory in the ISEC network. And right now, their JD is largely shared with the ECBs, where they govern on a monthly basis what actually happens for the LCs, doing all of the documentation correctly, and ECB currently handles any disputes or cases that we do have with customers. Digital marketing, because we centralized digital marketing and we merged all of our Facebook pages back in 1617, we also passed it to be under our national affiliation fee. So every LC contributes towards all of the costs associated with Facebook ads and the different things that we do across Facebook and Instagram. And here are 2 slides which show you what we consider to be the measures of success for the NLT and ISEC in Australia. So LCPs are told to have 2 roles. One is their leader of the LC role, and their 3 key measurements is to fulfill 100% goal achievement for the completes that they have set, for sustainable financial growth of their LC, and to ensure that more than 80% of their membership is productive. As an NLT member, they're responsible for ensuring that ISEC in Australia is achieving our goals, that the MC is growing sustainably, and that we are getting over 80% of ISEC in Australia's membership also achieving. The implication for LCPs is, in order to fulfill their NLT role, it means that they have to be very communicative with other LCPs to make sure that they can support those LCPs to also fulfill their leader of the LC roles. So by these measurements, we hope to build more of a collaborative kind of network when people are feeling responsible for each other's achievement. So MC members are both company directors, and we're also NLT members who actually ensure the growth of ISEC in Australia, both in complete achievement, sustainable financial growth, and in the membership being productive. So we take care of the legal part of ISEC in Australia, being ISEC Australia Limited. We're the company directors for that, and we're also the service body for ISEC in Australia as an entity. So more into the culture now on network management. So from an MC perspective, we do have good access to key data for decision making. Some of the data that's most challenging for us to sometimes collect are the weekly and monthly goal breakdowns for LC exchanges. Still, because we have legislated governance where LCs need to submit a monthly financial review, their exchange standards report for documentation, as well as a monthly talent review, we can access sufficient data to know what's happening with our network. We have learned to loop LCPs first into key updates and decision making. So sometimes when there's a very product or functional specific update, in the past of our term so far, it's been very easy for us to communicate with the LCVPs first. Still, we've learned to be able to communicate with the LCPs so that they not only are aware of what's going on, they can also help to drive the decisions that need to be made into their LCs. The current MC team are quite strong in execution. So with our previous plans, we've been able to implement most of the things that we set out for. However, the impact to the network and results are varied, because just because plan execution happens from the MC, whether it's coaching, whether it's internal campaigns, doesn't always result in a high GVA. And to know for all the functions, IGT is the most connected commission in the network towards each other as a commission, and they also have regular updates and R&R, and even just things like selfies when they're doing activity in their own Facebook group. And currently, as an MC team, we definitely look at IGT as a key example of how to do network management and engagement amongst our entity. So, some final external considerations are more to do with the mindset and attitude of Australians. The first one being is that Australians are motivated by a purpose, not by a challenge. So what we've seen is that more competitive measures have a limited effectiveness within ISEC in Australia. And if we look at Australia more broadly, when we see that there's been some kind of disaster and the nation has to come together, that's where people can actually step up and really contribute the best of what they can do as citizens, and not so much as, okay, let's strive to be better than others. For me personally, this is a bit of a complacency that comes with being a developed country as well, where we have a lot of privileges and opportunities around us that there aren't necessarily things that are challenging us to really step up and strive for more from a challenge perspective. We are quite an individualistic society. However, relationships are still key. And this definitely displays itself within ISEC, where it's much easier to work amongst the network, whether between LCs or whether between MC and LC, when a personal relationship is built and invested upon. But there is a low power distance. So hierarchy does not command as much respect in Australia. And it's not purely just being MC or an LCP that really ensures that something is going to happen. So that's why those relationships are still really important, because in general, Australia is quite a flat structure sort of society. If we look at values and behaviors from the ISEC core values, the emphasis of this term has been on striving for excellence and also activating leadership. We can see that focus to achieve has been the most visible behavior, even looking in exchange results and looking where most of the results have come from. And even when certain products have dropped in the results, the entity is still growing overall. Progress, not pendulum, is a key attitude of the term 17 and 18 EB transition. So what this means is learning from the 16-17 MC, and what they passed on is when there's too big of a cultural shift or too big of a strategic shift, that this can really lead to undesirable consequences, such as a drop in our exchange results. So what we're encouraging the 2018 EB to do is actually to strive for progress and not do a pendulum swing and try to do the exact opposite of what their predecessors do, to encourage them to actually continue most of what happened, especially the most positive things that happen, instead of trying to change every single thing and perhaps lose some of the strengths of the entity while they're moving along. So now I'm going to explain the national direction, because Australia works a little bit differently in that we don't create MC year plans, we actually create EB term plans. So starting from December 2016, this was the first time a national EB term plan was created. How this was done was that LCs planned a bit before the national conference, and during the national conference, the whole entity collectively decided on two wildly important goals, which in that time was to be about achieving the customer flow, and as well as doing a OD model evolution to make sure that LCs could actually grow. So the previous customer flow was achieved to 100% implementation, and the WIG actually evolved into being more about customer intimacy, which had a number of measures which did involve exchange growth, they involved NPS and also brand advocacy measures. And the OD model WIG became about ensuring that every LC jumps one tier in every single product that they run. In July 2017, there was a tweaking of the existing plan. So what my MC team did was to take the intention of the plan and to actually redefine the OD metrics into three categories, being talent capacity, financial strength, as well as in exchange as well, and also make the WIGs more specific. So from customer intimacy, we changed it into a WIG that is more about the conversion rate from open to applicant, which was our bottleneck in OGV, and also from the OD WIG of ensuring that every LC jumps a tier in every single product, is that every LC jumps a tier in the focus product that they run. So this past month in December, following the same logic and principle flow, we also co-created a national 2018 direction. Here, we actually created more things to do with the purpose. We also created behaviors, which I will showcase to you in one moment. So in the end, the whole intention of having a national direction is with the acknowledgement that ISEC happens at the local level, and we want the local level to be unified and clear on a direction that they're heading in for 1 year. It's also important to know that we have only done this for 1 year, and this is only the second year that we're doing it, and we're constantly learning how to better refine. So with that, I definitely do expect that more adjustments will be made when the incoming MC come in. At the same time, there should still be some unifying points to continue the direction of what the plan has been set at the previous conference, particularly in regards to the behaviors as well as in the purpose for why we're doing these things to begin with. So now I'm going to share with you what was the tweaked July 2017 plan, which my MC team had been working on until this stage. So the purpose is that we make leadership through exchange matter to each one of us, our country, and our world. That we wanted to make leadership through exchange the basis, and we wanted to make sure that people are not just doing exchange for the sake of exchange, that they really know why. And we make this work every day to make PNF real. That PNF is peace and fulfillment of humankind's potential. And if, as in ISEC, we want to make sure that all these things can happen, then we need to make sure that we implement and make sure that ISEC is actually running the way that it's supposed to. The culture that we wanted to create was defined by 4 key observable behaviors. Number 1 is to recognize progress and celebrate achievement. That when we've only achieved half of what we've done, yes, we haven't completely achieved our goal yet. Still, that shouldn't stop us from actually recognizing the kind of progress that we're making. Second is focus to achieve. Third is to be fast and have urgency. And finally is this idea that instead of trying to perfect plans, that we launch them first, we learn from them, we tweak and we make adjustments and repeat. And my MC's team name is MC Tweak, because we don't believe in coming with grand things and changing everything. We really want to keep moving forward and adjusting as we go along so that we don't have the pressure of coming up with something that's perfect. It's just for something which will work. So making incremental changes is the best way we believe that can be achieved. Our entity potential was 540 completes for the summer, which was 500 OGV and also 40 IGT. Our rate of goal achievement from the summer peak is sitting on between 30 to 40% across all the products. And you can also see that we only set goal for these 2 products. We did allow LCs to continue to run OGE and OGT as an MC team. And also later as an NLT, we did make a stand that the other products are not ones that we will drive. So our weeks were to increase the OGV open to application rate from 5 to 15%. So we managed to increase this from 5 to 10%. And then 100% of LCs jump 1 tier in their focus product by March when all of the realizations are complete. So that is yet to be measured still. And these are the 3 categories of OD metrics. So for finance, it's 80% of budget versus actual execution, 100% LC profitability, and not the spending per EP. 90% of total revenue from exchange. Exchange was looking at process time, conversion rate, and standards delivery. And for it was about percentage of members productive, team standards fulfillment, as well as percentage of IXP, which is 30%. So these are the metrics which are in our OD model, and they also form the basis of every sonar that we create and ask the LCs questions on. These also form the basis of our awards criteria. And so we call them the metrics that matter, because the way that we're encouraging LCs to measure what they're doing is through these 3 categories and through these 9 measurements. Going into 2018, this is the introduction for what we're striving for this year. So again, if you are interested in MC 1819, this is the second half of this plan is what your MC team will be responsible for carrying out. And for us, it all starts from the ability to make a change. It's an ability to achieve peace and fulfillment of humankind's potential for Australia and also for the world around us. And that the way we commit to doing that is leadership through exchange. That we don't want just to do it, we want it to be significant. Because our world has so much mediocrity within it. If you listen to Abdul, the current PAI, talk about it, in society, there's so many people who are just settling for less than the best and just being able to do whatever and not really strive for that full achievement. So if as ISEC, we really want to contribute something to the world, we ask ourselves, how can we actually fight mediocrity and give our best? Because in Australia, if we look at this current figure, we've reached 5%, 0.5% of the youth population through sign-ups to the Opportunities Portal in 2017 alone. That 0.5% is roughly 15,000 people who actually signed up and created an account. And how can we transform these engagements and actually enable leadership development for more youth in Australia and for the youth who come to Australia? That if we are already capable of reaching 15,000 people, then how can we ensure that more of them actually become exchange experiences? That we're looking at 600 plus complete ISEC experiences in 2018 to enable leadership development for more youth in Australia and the world. LCs are still in the midst of finalizing their final plans. At last count, we're looking at 750 completes that ISEC in Australia wants to achieve by the end of 2018. And again, just to remind, 20 to 30% of those will come in this upcoming peak, and 70 to 80% will come in our summer peak at the end of the year. So not only to do significant leadership through exchange, we want to treat it as our main thing, the main thing that we do that everything else follows. Because ISEC is only one of the organizations out there which strives for peace and fulfillment of humankind's potential. And that we don't want to try and be anyone else. We don't want to try and be the UN. We don't want to try and be any charity that you know of. We just want to give the best of who we are and what we do, which is significant leadership through exchange and treating that as the main thing that we do. This is the purpose that ISEC in Australia has committed to, because we know what we need to contribute to the world around us, and we know that our contribution needs to be so much bigger than it is right now. We can only get there by treating it as the main thing that we do. Because this is the biggest youth population that the world has ever seen. And if we are going to really do something for the youth population, then that makes the purpose even more important. And our commitment is to exchange, empower young people through that, and repeat the process. Exchange, empower, repeat will be the hashtag that you see everywhere from ISEC in Australia, because we believe that young people get empowered through our exchange products, and that we want to keep repeating that throughout 2018. Our wildly important goals to be able to achieve this are as follows. So one is that we are still working to increase the open applicant conversion rate from 5% in this point in time to that 15% to make sure that more people who sign up for our platform are actually applying for projects as a key bottleneck in our processes. And we want to make sure that 70% of our membership are hitting 100% of their goals. Right now is the national recruitment time in ISEC in Australia, and we're ensuring that from the beginning we're recruiting the right members so that 70% of them can achieve their goal by the 31st of May 2018. The key behavior that we want to drive within this year is to focus and fight to achieve. That either one of them alone, that focus may bring us the right area to look at, and fight may bring us the biggest amount of results that we want to do. And either one of them will not necessarily allow the achievement, will not necessarily allow just doing significant leadership through exchange as our main thing by itself. And that's why our whole entity in December has committed to doing both. And this is really important context for all of you listening in, because each webinar that you go to and attend after this, and all of the research that you do, has this national 2018 direction as its basis. Great. So that's been a lot of talking from me. And now I just wanted to know from the people that we have in attendance, any questions or clarifications that you may have for what's just been spoken about.
How do you measure productivity in Australia? No, can you like ask a question?
Okay, so we have a question from Dio from Indonesia, which is how productivity is measured in Australia. So percentage of members productive is measured, previously it's measured by two things. One is looking at task completion, and one is looking at goal achievement. So is the member hitting at least 80% of all the tasks that they're assigned, and are they achieving at least 80% of all the goals that they're responsible for, whether that was opens, applicants, and approves. Cool. Do we have any more questions? It's a lot of information, so feel free to take some time to digest as well.
Oh, what kind of tools that you use for this one? I mean, is it only for exchange? Like, okay, for exchangers, we have like, okay, so number of approved and everything, but like for back office, what did you use?
Yep. So our current performance appraisal tool is tracked mainly from a front office perspective, and looking at back office is something that we're that we're looking into. So for the current context, it's more into the front office measurement.
I'm not sure if you mentioned this before, but are the EB terms aligned with the global timeline, or do they start February 1st?
Thank you for the question. No, I didn't mention it. Yes, we're aligned. So they do start February the 1st, which means that our current EB term is finishing up. And yeah, so we're aligned. I guess a bit of extra information to know is that the shift to global timeline was fairly easy for Australia, and the implication of the timeline is actually quite advantageous because EB terms start with their smallest peak first. So generally with LCs, they tend to take this peak as, their learning point and everything, which means that by the time they approach the summer peak, they're generally more well prepared to actually execute it.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Please let me know as well if you want me to pull the slideshow back to any of the previous slides.
Yes.
Yep.
I want to ask you something. All right. So, nice presentations. And what I want to ask is that your week in 2017, which is if you open to application,
Yes.
conversion rate from 5 to 15%. What I want to know is that what was your strategy actually, like the main activities, particularly that LCD before to achieve or from to applications. So more into tech.
Thank you for the question. So for that, actually, one of the simplest lead measures that we implemented is to encourage LCs to contact their opens within 24 hours. So from MC side, it's mainly into reviewing the national campaigns to make sure that they can drive that. The thing that was rewarded and also recognized was the LCs who do manage to contact, and also analyzing the trends of when people contact and why they contact and how to make it easier. So purely from this one metric of getting opens contacted in 24 hours is the main way that we were able to increase it to the 10%.
So the one who do it is actually MC, or there's an NST to support that for 24 hours.
It was MC who tracked it directly. So MC didn't contact, they were tracking the LCs to ensure that LCs were contacting, and we did the tracking on a weekly basis.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Jessica. Thank you for your presentation first. And my question is quite similar one the rest, but I was wondering what do you really what do you usually use for the channels to communicate with the LCPs and MPs for their productivity and goals, and also in terms of MC coaching or maybe MC visit, I was wondering about the frequencies. So I think that's my question.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the channels that we use to communicate is largely through Facebook. We have one overall membership group and we have an internal communication schedule. So every day there's maximum 2 posts, one at 2 p.m. and one at 10 p.m. in which we use to communicate main updates towards the network. Generally, people will also have their commission chats as a Facebook Messenger group, and even the NLT, we have chats which are, one is like a serious business chat which is about work, and then the other is actually a more informal casual chat. So we discovered in the past that it's quite important to have both, because Australians just like to, you know, like banter, sometimes talk shit sometimes, and it's really important for the relationship building. And we also want to make sure that it doesn't get in the way of discussing the work and that things don't get lost. So that's that question for the communication channels. For the frequency of the coaching, in my MC term, we will execute 5 coaching touch points. So we visited in August, in November, in January, and in March. And some LCs for the 5th touch point, they also had us for their regional conferences in September or so. The final touch point as well is that beyond being a coaching visit in March, we will also be supporting the regional conferences and supporting the LCPs to deliver them in late March and April. So that's the frequency of the coaching touch points. For the I'll just add on some information as well here for the frequency of seeing the network. So we have 2 major national conferences, which is one in July, which is the first MC term conference, and that's for the whole network. One in December, which is for EB Currents and Alex. And then besides from these 2 touch points, we will also see our LCPs for President's Meeting in April as well as in October. October is a transitional one, so all of the LCPs come with their successors, and April is purely for current. Okay, cool. So yeah, hope that answers your question. You're welcome.
Hi, JC.
Hi, Wigra. Hello?
Hi, JC. So I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I'm not sure if you're cutting out. I can hear you right now though.
All right. Okay. So this is my second question. What was your strategy to implement to actually achieve IGT? And what was the role of MC and also LCT?
Sorry, was that IGT? You cut out in the middle there.
Yeah. My question is that what was your strategy to achieve IGT?
Mm-hmm.
And what is actually the main role between MCs and also LCs?
Cool. So for the first half of our term, because of the way the timeline works, so OGV was the primary focus of the MC team. And we actually have, on the MC, we had one OGV, MCVP, we had one digital marketing and one physical marketing. All 3 of them are working on OGV, and the TM as well as finance are mainly supporting OGV. So what that meant for IGT is I had one MCVP who handles both IGT network and also PD selling IGT. And her primary responsibility was actually more on network management, because from the previous term, there were a lot of materials and some strategies. So we wanted to be able to execute that. And for a bit of information about IGT, you can find out more if you head to the webinar in a later date as well, is that we discovered right now our network is actually having a bottleneck in between contacting companies and actually going on meetings. That previously we had a lot of people who are just generating a lot of leads and a lot of contacts for companies, and sometimes not necessarily contacting them or not being able to achieve meetings from them. So this is something that my MCVP has been working on. And for the second half of that term, because our biggest GV peak is already over, we changed our MC structure. So now we will have one MCVP purely for IGT and another one purely for PD. And both of them will be driving IGT. And TM and finance are also switching half of their focus into IGT. So that's more upcoming. And for your exact question, the strategy was very simple. There's no specific strategies. It was more onto network management. And you can see how it reflects in the results because our results are not as big, even in a relative sense, compared with OGV. Does that answer your question, Vigo?
Yes, super cool. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Hey, Jessie.
Hi.
Hi, so I have one more questions regarding the exchanges, but I saw it like it through to 1516 to from 1516 to 1617. A lot of exchange actually has dropped. So I can see like for your term, you were really hardworking to recover the exchanges and try to promote it. So I was wondering, like, what was your biggest challenge to recover the exchanges in subject way and object way? And on the other hand, I totally agree that we should try, like, next time should try to continue the strategy you have set to, you know, like, make more exchanges and to fulfill the goals. So I think that's it.
Sure. The challenges. So for me to clarify, are you talking about the challenges so far in 17-18 to actually try and grow back again?
Yes.
Okay. So this is on a couple of fronts. I would say number one is before my term, I realized one of the biggest things that we actually needed to do in ISEC in Australia is to bring focus. Because if you look at the size of our entity and if you look at the number of products we were running, many LCs were running 3 or 4 products when it doesn't make sense because they're not doing enough volume. And actually I saw and I observed that this was taking a lot of the focus away. So to introduce focus was a bit of a challenge because from a network facing perspective, there are people, you know, working for OGT and OGE, and like from a very emotional perspective, it's feeling like, oh, you know, the MC is not giving me like resources or support. And we did face some challenges with this and also some questions as to what do we actually do with these products if we're not giving them resources. So I think that having that conversation and being able to ensure that focus happened was really important because we were also very conscious as an MC team. We don't want to come off as, you know, like not caring about different products or not caring about people in the network. So to execute our strategies, which were purely only for mainly OGV and then also some for IGT, to be able to do that. From a resource perspective, to give you context, the budget that we started the 17-18 term with is actually only 1/3 of the previous investments that other MC terms made. So we used to invest about $100,000 into our investments, which will include things like seaterships or international chairs or certain like conference delivery type of things and things of that nature. And because of the financial situation, we only could invest about $33,000. And for me as an MCP, my ambition was actually to grow more than the 15-16 term for a term to date perspective. And the thing that I found very challenging throughout is recognizing that the resources is much less because my team has 7 people and 1516 had 10 people. In 1516, we were spending $100,000. In 1718, we're only spending $33,000 for investments. And with that, it was knowing that while I don't believe resources is the excuse, I do believe that it is a factor in the challenges for being able to grow back again. I guess finally, when it comes to growth challenges, something that right now as an MC team we're looking to invest more in moving forward is actually into our IR partnerships, because the context of Australia is that previously to 1516, while we did have partnerships, the number of exchange is not really significant enough, and kind of like Australia, we could do the amount of exchange that we did without needing IR partnerships, that we don't actually know how to do IR very effectively. And to achieve the ambitions that we have for this term, it's really important for us to know how to run a proper partnership. And I can say that for our summer peak, we didn't really know how. We knew which entities we were partnered with. We were doing the marketing promotions, except there's like a bit of a lacking, I guess, working relationship and a bit of a lacking strong marketing message to make sure that we were driving enough of our EPs there. Having said that though, I think a key achievement from IR is the fact that of all of our OGV approvals, half of them went to our top 4 partners in AP, which are Vietnam, Taiwan, Indonesia, as well as Thailand. So there's some progress, and there's also some challenges to make sure that IR can be even more effective. That's why I'm also delivering this webinar from Indonesia right now, because I've been here to build some of our IR from my own perspective, and hopefully we can see the results of that for the upcoming peak and for the rest of the year. So yeah, to cap off, that was implementing focus into actions. It was recognizing resource constraints and the differences in resource. And finally, it is challenges in knowing how to best capitalize off international relations.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Great. So we have 2 minutes left. Thank you for all the questions so far. It's been really good for me to give you some additional information. So let me just check now and see if anyone is still thinking, then I'm happy to go up until the ending time. If everyone is actually done with questions, then you can feel free to leave if that is the case. So yeah, can you please let me know if you're still thinking of questions, or if you finish asking all the questions that you have.
I'm done with questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Marcel. Thank you for answering and the presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the questions. Hello, Wigra?
Yeah, I say thank you very much. You know what I mean?
I can't hear you properly. So I'll assume that everything's all good. Yes?
Yeah, everything's good. All good.
Okay.
Thank you
Amazing.
very much.
Thank you for coming, even though I gave you the incorrect link. I'm sorry about that.
Hi, Dio.
Okay. See you. See you later. Bye-bye.